Welcome to the Diverse Voices, Increasing Diversity and Accessibility in Development panel. I'm happy you're here. My name is Richard Duck. I'm a launch manager with the Oculus Store team, and I'm extremely excited to host this event as diversity and accessibility are some of the best ways to guarantee that players, like me and you, show up and support great content. For example, closed captioning isn't only a service that's for the hearing impaired. I use subtitles all the time in games and movies and everything because it's easier for me sometimes just to read than to listen. And you can go ahead and laugh at that. It's okay. But I'm also conscious of other people in the room when I'm playing, and I usually want to keep the volume low just not to disturb anybody. And of course, I want experiences to acknowledge and celebrate the vastness and depth of humanity. When I see myself, someone I know, or someone I want to be in an experience, it's exhilarating. We hope to show the various considerations as you need as a developer to prioritize diversity and accessibility in your applications. Taking the time to prioritize having an expanded audience can pay off in dividends. Building community, talking to marginalized creators and consumers can open up your audience. And again, opening your audience means a lot of really exciting things. A larger community, dedicated users to champion your game, a bigger group of fans excited about what you're doing now and what you'll be doing in the future. And this requires a combination of hard and soft skills. Broadening your team's perspective in hiring, design, development, and more requires empathy and conscious decisions. The output of this effort positively affects, again, things like art direction, storytelling, diversity and inclusion on teams, gathering feedback from a wide audience, and so much more. And it's work that'll lead to more people seeing that your application reflects the world. Finally, accessibility helps everyone. Not just those that need it, but might want it for their experience. Adding subtitles. Again, I love subtitles. Allowing users to sit while playing, distance grabbing, colorblind options, and so much more can allow more users and more people to enjoy your experience and envelop themselves in the reality you've created. So with that, I have an absolutely fantastic panel today. First, I'm going to start off with Marty Kyle. She's a content launch manager for the Oculus Store, works closely with developers launching on Quest to ensure their experiences have the most successful launch and beyond. We got Josh Boykin, founder of IntelliGame, a game critic, consultant, writer, streamer, podcaster, project manager, and so much more. And we have Hesfasio Hassan. Hesfasio is the creator and lead developer of Museum Multiverse, a series for Gear VR and Oculus Go. And Hesfasio has also founded the game studio Made in Brooklyn Games. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
So I got some great questions for all of you. Oh, hey, yes. Hey, I'm excited. Thanks for being here as well. And it's a pleasure to have all of you. So we're actually going to start off kind of talking about how you got into VR. So what was your experience getting into the VR industry, and how do you develop for VR while taking into account diversity, inclusion, and accessibility? Marty, I'm actually going to have you start off.
Yeah, for sure. When I first started in VR, it was mostly through like academic conferences and academic labs that were doing some really interesting work in VR hardware and software development. So I went to a lot of conferences, and I think the kind of like overwhelming truth at those conferences was that oftentimes I was one of the few women that were attending. So this kind of theme of needing diversity in VR development and overall games has been present ever since I started working in VR. After those conferences and being involved at universities and academic institutions, I kind of went on to work at Sony doing content development for film and TV and interactive media. We published a few VR experiences onto the Oculus Store, and then that's how I got to Oculus. For the second part of your question, I think, which was how do you go about starting to build for diversity in VR? I think it's a super valid question because of the fact that in VR, we're trying to replicate or build a virtual world. And if our virtual world isn't representative of our real world, where we have people of color, queer people, a whole diverse like set of people and consumers for our content, you're not going to have a representative virtual reality if you don't have these kind of groups present. So I think that, accounting for them in terms of representation, accounting for diverse groups in terms of your developer base, in terms of your users and what kind of needs they have, all of these are important things to consider while you're building VR experiences.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And Hesfasio, it's your turn. What is your experience getting into VR, and how do you develop while taking into account D&I?
Absolutely. I started with 3 friends $2.50 for a cup of coffee. It was the price of admission for a cafe and a drink. So actually, we started our first experience building it in a coffee shop. I know this is kind of like the equivalent to being in a garage, I guess, in New York City. But we all met together and worked on this little horror game I had an idea for quite some time. What was really cool was our team was diverse naturally, just based off of our backgrounds, and it was really cool. I think it's like one of the parts of like being in the melting pot that is New York. So we worked tirelessly to actually make this experience the best that it could be with the time that we had. We were all doing this outside of work whenever we had the chance, and also like some Saturdays and stuff. And it actually became slowly but surely, it actually became the project that we were really excited about. So that being said, we built out a ton of parts for in like our newer experiences. We've taken a huge role to make sure like accessibility is incredibly important. One of the reasons why Museum Multiverse has subtitles and also is localized in a bunch of other languages. I would actually like to kind of talk a little bit about like accessibility in the sense of like access to devices too. We actually like built this experience back in the old days of VR, actually like the Gear VR old days. And we realized if we wanted to release this on a platform that like people can actually like try out, let's say the equivalent of us in that age, like when we were at that age around 2016, we were going to have to build this out on the Gear VR because of the fact that most people would actually be able to enjoy the experience there. That was actually incredibly successful, and it ended up being like the approach we take to make every game in the studio now.
That's fantastic. I mean, again, accessibility to devices is super important, and making sure more people can play and experience your title is fantastic. And also, again, the bigger the audience, the more people you can actually have accessible to your game. Josh, I have a question for you. So diversity and inclusion in games also includes accessibility and making applications more playable to everyone, regardless of their playing preferences or needs. Can you just talk about how accessibility, diversity, and inclusion can all come into play in VR?
I mean, sure. So I'm not a VR developer by nature. I'm a game critic, but spending time analyzing games and a bunch of other types of media to figure out how these mediums can be accessible is something that's really important to me. The wider range of audience of people that you have that can, consume your game and give feedback on it, it helps you tell a more well-rounded, just more enjoyable story as a whole. I think it provides a space where, as we get a little bit further past some of the things that feel more like just engaging with the technology, the shooting galleries and whatnot, and trying to figure out how do we build human stories into these experiences? How do we give people something to reflect on, a way to grow, or an opportunity to see themselves in the media they love? It's really important for us to understand that doesn't just come from being a good storyteller based on your own lived experience, but also on the lived experience of other folks who you might not understand as fully. And that involves having a more diverse group of people who play your game, a more diverse group of people who give input on how the game is created and shaped in the first place, and a more diverse group of people who give the commentary that helps to shape the situation as a whole. And I think that when you are looking at development from those perspectives, whether you're working on a game or an interactive experience or a narrative, everybody ends up winning in the end.
That's incredibly good advice. I think fantastic advice. Madi, I'm actually going to ask you this question, but have you focus a little bit on accessibility. So can you just talk about how that can come into play with VR and what developers can do right now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, accessibility is incredibly important in VR because one of the best parts of VR is user agency. Like you have the ability to look wherever you want, go wherever you want. You have a lot more control over how you experience the application than you do in 2D media, where you're kind of forced to look at a certain, square area. You have your whole 360 view around you in VR. So then, like, what happens whenever you can't, move, or whenever you can't look around, or whenever you're not hearing things, or whenever you're not seeing certain colors? it makes it incredibly limiting. Like it feels like, what's the point of having all of this great content in VR if you can't play any of it and you can't use the agency that other people can use easily or build into the experience. So for VR developers, I think the best thing that they could do is probably playtest as much as possible while looking at your game from different lenses. So think to yourself, like, how many times am I using the color red, and only the color red to signal like enemies or danger in my game? And what happens if someone can't see that color? Can they still be aware that enemies are coming? Can they still fight against them? How often is like a combination of, mana, stamina, and health being displayed as red, green, and blue in your game? And what if someone can discern between the three of those? Or what if someone isn't able to follow dialogue? Just try to playtest in as many situations as possible. Playtest with sound off, with those colors off, or in black and white colors. Playtest without movement or without certain controller configurations, maybe simplify your controller configurations, and just try to put your application in as many different testing situations as possible, so that you can get an accurate understanding for how players that might have those limitations are going to be approaching your game. And kind of like a part two to that advice is have as many people as possible play your game as well, because they'll probably pick up on things that you don't really notice.
Absolutely. I have lots of stories of friends who didn't know colorblind mode was an option and completely changed their experience after they realized it. Those are all great examples, which is actually going to lead to kind of a big question. This is going to be for everybody. Basically, like, increasing diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in games is kind of like big and unwieldy, right? We've given some answers already, but what are some of the best practices you'd recommend for developers to take into consideration while working on a game or building a community or expanding their audiences, or maybe something else? Hesfasi, I'll have you start with that one.
So this is a pretty big question. And when I think of kind of fostering a community of diverse content creators, I think of how one of the solutions that you can do is actually hire these creators and so we can build out like amazing experiences. This is something special happens when you introduce a new, really great content creator to a new medium like VR or AR and have them tackle different problems through angles that you would have never considered while learning the medium. It is amazing and actually opens the array of possibilities. And also, Made in Brooklyn Games were a little small studio, so we're not making humongous 3-hour games. So most of the time, we're actually building out smaller experiences. And at the end of those smaller experiences, we actually now have like a concluded project, now that the content creator is now familiar with VR or AR, and now there is a project that they have to actually showcase for different roles in the future. So this is what I do when us as the studio are reaching out and actually trying to foster the next grade, foster the community. Basically, it's I try to reach out to content creators that I find who are amazing but aren't represented because it mirrors my background. I wanted to make games since I was 6. There was no clear pathway to do that, so I gave up for a hot second and then came back into it. So this approach is really cool because it actually has given me the ability to work with content creators from all around the world, all the way to people in my backyard in Brooklyn here. So I think what's really cool is, honestly, those who don't learn from history are destined to repeat it. So if we want this space to be inclusive, we need to the content creators need to be here building the stuff. So when the jobs come in AR and VR, they'll be ready for it.
Yes, everybody needs to be ready for this. The future is coming and the future is now. So Madi, I'm actually going to ask again the big question. How would you answer that?
I would say, you don't know what you don't know. So if there's something, that you're trying to represent in your game and you want to bring diversity, you want to bring accessibility, don't be scared to reach out to communities around you, or don't be scared to educate yourself and make yourself vulnerable and be like, these are the biases that I have. This is, how I thought that my game should be, but I clearly, think that there's room for improvement. Can you please give me constructive criticism? Can you please, teach me like how to make this game more accessible? But also take the time to like educate yourself. Sometimes, it's a lot of pressure to put on marginalized communities to be the person who's educating you all the time about things. So take the time to go through yourself and read some articles written about people who are, experiencing difficulties with representation or difficulties with accessibility, and just try to see how you can incorporate those ideas from these articles into your game.
That's true. Doing the research yourself is always a great way to get started. And Josh, like, I know you've built a great community of people. I want to get your take on this as well. So how would you answer this question again, like, especially around community?
Sure. I think a big part of how whether you're building a community that you're trying to aim to be more inclusive, or whether you're working on a particular project, is to think about that inclusivity and that diversity not as an option, but as a part of the foundation of what you're trying to put together. So when if you're going to ask questions about how do we make sure that this is accessible to people with different types of visibility or different mobility, like, think about that as square one of how you're putting your project together. I think a lot of times, a lot of folks who are more able-bodied or who might fit more of the more societal norms will go into these discussions with the idea like, oh, well, it would be great if insert thing here. But for a lot of the folks who are out here who have those things, it's not it would be great if, it's actually their lived experience. And so thinking about, accessibility, for closed captioning, for a number of the things that Marty already brought up, like, think about those as the bedrock of how you create a good product, as opposed to the things that we can hopefully put in if we have time after we've gotten feature complete. Like, feature complete involves that diversity and that inclusion.
That's true. You don't want to be at the finish line trying to figure out how you're going to add features at the very end. I love that answer. So actually,
well, I would say you're not at the finish line. If you're, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but like, I would say that you're not at the finish line at that point.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
That's totally true. Yeah, I actually really like that one, because if you're not at the finish line, you can't add. You don't want to stop until you actually get that taken care of. Again, all this is super important. So actually, Hespasi, I'm gonna bring it back to you. You have a studio right now. You talked a little bit about this, but like, when you built your studio, like, what were the other foundations and things that you took, into account when you're adding D&I and accessibility into building it? I'd like to know.
Yeah, absolutely. What we did for our studio at Meeting Brooklyn Games was we realized how important it was to have a diverse team at the beginning of like our first game. We brought that into every other game that we've created, whether it be incredibly small to the smaller instant games that we work on, to the AR effects that we worked on, all the way to our bigger projects like Museum Multiverse. And I think it's really helped the studio. And also what's really cool is it's fostering the next generation of content creators, because it actually shows that like this narrative is possible with like someone as small as like my studio of benefit packages here are free ramen for lunch every day or something. So it's
Hey, free ramen's always good. I love ramen, one of my favorite dishes. So Josh, I have a question for you in particular. And we talked about this a little bit. What are ways that narratives can actually reflect diversity and inclusion? And of course, this includes VR, but just overall, how can developers make sure that that's something that they're taking into account?
Sure, that's a good question. I think people often hear the term diversity and inclusion, and it's just one of these packaged things. They go together, but what do they actually mean? Diversity being the idea of like bringing in a bunch of different people from different backgrounds, and inclusion being the part where we actually make those people feel welcome, accurately represented, provide space for them to be their authentic selves. We're getting better at D. I can sometimes be a little tough. And I think that particularly applies when we're talking about game narratives, or when we're talking about development spaces where people may just be getting a hand on what it means to actually be in a diverse environment or to search out diverse voices to include in their work. A lot of it, I think, comes from having a mindset, again, of I want this diversity and inclusion to be a foundation of what I'm putting together, whether it's a small project or a large project. I want to recognize that there are all sorts of different people who are going to be taking on all sorts of new interactive experiences. And I want as many of those people to feel like they have a seat at the table and to enjoy what I'm putting together as much as, for any of the developers out there, like you ostensibly enjoy the project you're putting together, right? You want to provide as few blockades as possible so that people are able to go ahead and take part in that. And I think I try not to get too caught up in the abstract, right? The idea that it's like, well, it's all about mindset. But I think also that idea, again, that Maria talked about earlier, like coming from a perspective where you understand that you have something to learn. Even I can recognize with my audience for IntelliGame that we tend to skew a little bit more white sometimes, a little bit more cisgender. And so when we're having discussions or playing games that are outside of my lived experience, I have to be able to make space to figure out, how do I get people who can help steer those discussions? How can I find ways to make sure that the platform that I have created is a platform that's being used responsibly? And I think we should all consider that, whether we're developing a game or whether we're a content creator or whether we are working any number of roles at perhaps a large company, that we are responsible for a platform and that we can utilize that leverage that we have in that platform, even just a little bit, to help make a difference in positive ways.
That's totally true. I actually want to bring up, this is going to go right perfectly into a story that, Madi, I believe you have a funny thing you want to talk about in terms of like characters in games and stories that you brought up last time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we had a conversation about like, when do you differentiate tokenism versus like representation and good representation? And I think like the advice that I heard that was the strongest, which was if you could replace your diverse character with like a talking animal or like a magical object that could somehow like deliver an important piece of narrative, then it probably means that you don't have a good representation of that person in your experience. So like, if your character takes the same amount of real estate as it would for like a signpost that says like, oh, quest goes this way, that's not deep enough for people to feel included, and that's not deep enough for people to feel like they're actually seeing themselves and they're actually represented in this experience. So usually I like to say like the diverse characters you should have like the same amount of like backstory, thought, concept art, and like just effort put into it as the characters that maybe represent a wider majority in your experience. Like it shouldn't be this kind of added-on thought that really is just there for the purpose of filling, a certain need, or just filling a certain need in your game, even if it's not just like a diversity need or inclusion need or whatever. But it should really have a meaning in your game. It shouldn't just be something that's additional. Otherwise, we're going to see ourselves as just additional content. Like, for example, like as a woman, I can tell whenever a girl character has literally just been, it was written as a male character, and then at the last minute, they're like, let's make this into a woman. You can tell those kinds of things. There's nuances from having lived those experiences that I can see whenever that's being done. So just, avoid throwing in characters like that last minute and as an afterthought. They should be, as Josh said, foundational parts of your game.
Exactly. And again, that's, of course, you brought it up, how do you avoid tokenism in the games, right? So that's actually something I'm going to bring to you, Hess, as well. How do you, as a developer, how do you avoid that?
Yeah, this is a excellent point that I can rant on for hours about. But I would like to actually kind of talk a little bit more about the cause of this. And it's due to the systematic history of representation in media. So how do we solve that? What we're doing at Made in Brooklyn Games as our part to rectify this is having more diverse, well-rounded main characters in our story, because those are the stories we want to tell. Growing up, I didn't identify with a huge amount of characters in popular media because no one looked like me. It almost felt like I was silenced, and TV betrayed me after I put so many hours into it. But our studio is going to continually try our best to lead by example by telling underrepresented stories until either the narrative changes or we close down and run out of money.
Hey, you gotta make sure don't run out of money. Please don't do that. I want to see more of your games, so keep that going. So keep your games. Your games are great. Keep it going. Actually, Josh, I'm asking you a question, and this is really for all of us. But what are some ways that you actually build and foster community amongst diverse creators? I think that's super important personally. Josh, I know we've talked about this as well. How do you do that?
Certainly. I think a lot of times when it comes to fostering community for inclusive groups, right, from a diverse background, a lot of times it's trying to find where people are or making spaces where people can gather. Game Devs of Color Expo, for instance, is a really fantastic organization and a conference that meets every year and specifically centers on the experiences of people of color, though it's open for anybody to attend. And the nice thing about it is that, for instance, when I go there as a journalist and a content creator, my first thought is like, oh, I can breathe here in a way that is very different from when I am at E3 or PAX, things of that nature. Though increasingly, those floors are getting more diverse as well. We're just recognizing that the diverse audience that has always been playing games is now more often getting a seat at the table, which is really positive. I think that the more that you can create those spaces, and if you are not attached to one of those spaces already, search them out, the easier it is to go ahead and build the voices that you need and the opinions that you need into the infrastructure you're creating.
That's true. And Game Devs of Color is also fantastic. I want to shout that out again. That's really, really wonderful. Please go to it virtually this year. Madi, how do you do that? How do you actually build and foster community amongst diverse creators?
Yeah, when I come to communities, I like to always think not just how am I benefiting from this community? How is this community helping me network or find opportunities? But also, how can I approach this community and give it opportunities? How can I benefit the people within it and lift them up as well? I think that in a lot of the spaces that I've been in the games industry and in VR, it's been a lot of times where I've been the only queer woman of color in those spaces. And the way to combat that is to find more and help us lift each other up and help us infiltrate these spaces that are currently being controlled by these majority groups. And find opportunities to help others around you and lift them up. A lot of times, if I'm playtesting or if someone else is playtesting my game, I'll be like, can I playtest yours? Can I offer some criticism on your game design document? Can I look at your code or your assets or anything like that and try to see if there's any optimization I can help with? But how can I contribute to this person's growth in the same way that they can contribute to mine? I think that's super important when it comes to especially marginalized communities, is lifting each other up as we go.
Awesome. Lifting each other up as we go. Lift as we climb. Always important. So I just wanted to kind of ask everybody just for a quick, final set of thoughts. This has been wonderful so far. This is a ton of information. It's like a gold mine worth of information. So thank you. Hess, you got any quick final thoughts that you want to share?
Sure. So I'm actually really excited about the future of VR. So I'm actually incredibly excited about the progress we're making on just the software piece and the hardware piece of headsets. For example, I may actually be able to put my Quarantine Pro into a headset one day now, and that's really exciting. But I'm actually really excited about, as well, outside of the game space, a lot of these really amazing emerging companies that are in AR and VR that are popping up and making waves. For example, a couple of my fellow Oculus Launchpad alums are actually creating companies like Escape Immersive Relaxation, a Black-owned VR spa in LA, or Barnstormers, VR baseball experience that actually celebrates the MLB's 100-year anniversary. All of these amazing things are happening in VR, and it's truly mind-blowing. There's even really amazing companies here in New York, like Praxis Labs, who are working on using the medium for diversity and inclusion in the workspace. These are just a microcosm of companies that are just popping out, while at some point, there's so many more that are just still working in their basement or coffee shop, whatever you call it. And I'm really excited for those to come into the future as well.
Awesome. Madi, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm just really excited about the future of VR technology in terms of getting more representation from our creators. I think that if we have diverse creators, we can kind of redefine the language of virtual reality hardware and software and kind of make these accessibility and representation needs of ours into standards across all the applications and across all the content. So I'm really excited to see how content creators are going to make the things that we missed from those media like TV and from 2D games into standards across VR.
Awesome. And last but not least, Josh, what are your thoughts? Your quick final thoughts?
I think that there's potentially a lot of things to look forward to in the world. Right now, a lot of people are experiencing tension for any number of reasons because 2020 has been a heck of a year. But I think that game technology in general has been used as a way to help people both escape and process, and VR gives us an opportunity to do that even more so with full immersion. I think that as we think about not just the diverse people who are helping to lead some of these charges, but also the way allies can be involved in centering some of those voices and experiences, I think there's a lot of things that we can really look forward to and be proud of as we come out on the other side of some of the things that have been 2020. And I hope that VR is part of that.
I believe 2020 will continue to be a thing, but VR will continue to be a bright light as we move forward with it. So I believe so, at least. I'm here for it. I hope we're all here for it. I want to thank all of you. All of you have been wonderful. So again, you've given all of our audience an incredible gold mine of information that they can use to move forward. So thank you again for being here. I appreciate all of you. And so thank you. Thank you so much. And so to wrap this up, we're going to talk about a few things. So if you ever heard of Launchpad, go check it out. Go sign up for it if you want to. There's also Oculus Start. That's a good way to get started as well. Those are both great programs to get you in a place where if you have an idea or you're kind of in a space where you can make VR titles or you're not sure where to start, go check them out. They're wonderful. Madi is working on some accessibility guidelines. They're going to be coming out in the near future. Keep an eye out for those. This is really going to help you out. Again, another gold mine. We're just giving you gold mines left and right today so we can get even more information. Expect to see us at Game Does a Color Expo. It's a great place to be. If you haven't signed up for it, please do, and expect to see a talk from one of our coworkers. And finally, the future is human, which means we need you, the developer, to embrace humanity while making your experience. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing how you, the developer, and anybody who's watching this, shapes the future of VR. Thank you.